So last week started the coastal scenes and boats theme, and last week I did a sort of painting demo. So I was doing this sort of thing, waves, just with paint. I thought this week I'll focus a little bit on strategies for drawing boats. So hopefully some of this will be useful. So I'll do a couple of very quick kind of drawings of different boats. I think for me the easiest boats to draw are when they're either sort of side on or kind of front facing on. Yeah, so I'll do a little bit of this one first. And then the more complicated ones are where you're seeing like 2 or 3 sides down the top. So, so something like one of these, I'll go with this one. I tend to start off by just getting a feeling for where I want to draw. So I'll draw quite lightly, a rough shape, as a way of just visualising on the paper where I want to work. So I'm thinking about there for this one. And once I've got that, I'm happy that that's going to be the right place for the drawing. I tend to start maybe at the top and start with something like a sail. So I'm drawing that one in, a little bit there. That's coming down to about here. I think that part, I think that may be slightly longer from there to there than it is there to there. So let's know that. I can do things like that just to try and judge the angles with that. Get into there. And then the next part of the sail, a bit underneath, I think that is going to be about the same size as I think from here to here is about the same as here to here. And you can just measure that off with a pencil just to check. You can also check like the width in relation to the height. And then this little collection of sails on the right, I think the easiest thing is perhaps get that kind of triangle in. So again, just trying to sight the angle. I think it's that sort of angle. And I think what I did this morning that I found easy was actually start with that little bottom one, because these are a little bit more complicated shape-wise. So that would come down here. And let's see, that's about halfway from here to here, so about to there. Or again, we can just judge the angle, something like that. Great. And then these top two, that point there is roughly on the same level as this point. So I'm thinking sort of getting a nice shape across there. The other thing you can look at is these spaces where you can see the bits of the sky and the sea in between the sails, so those negative shapes are worth looking for. And then this is coming under here, and then there's another one underneath there. Again, not quite such a steep angle, slightly shallower angle, almost running parallel to this one. It's coming across here. Just a guideline to set that out. And then looking at where that point is in relation to that, it's just slightly further over here. So I think I'm seeing something a bit like that for the sails. And then from there, I can then carry on for the rest of the boat. So the front of the boat lines up with the front of this sail, so that's going to come up to there. And then if I get the last little sail in, there's a gap about that much. We've got a sail, something like that. And then the back of the boat is about there, and this wants to just very gently, there's probably too much space there, but it just wants to come down a little bit, perhaps that wants to come down a bit more. So that's probably how I go about drawing something like that. And a little bit of this one. So, again, although it's quite a complicated scene, because they're square onto me, I find that a bit easier to draw. This one was photo I used for this painting. So this one I painted years ago as it went into a magazine article. They wanted like a step-by-step demo. So I did that for the magazine.
That's amazing. When did you do that?
Long time ago, 2017. Right, according to that. Yeah. So that's one of the boat paintings. This is another boat painting I did a bit more recently over at Mersey Islands. That's a bit more like what you know. So something like that, or one of these boats. Again, I tend to start with little shapes up here. Again, you could do the same thing that I did before, getting a rough idea where I want to work. So that could be the overall shape, and then there's all the rigging on the top, so you could leave room for that as well. And then once I've got that far, I would start perhaps in the middle with some window shapes. Something like that. These are I think fairly square. And this one on the end is slightly narrower. I think it's on almost like a bay shape. That would go slightly narrower that way. This one, I feel like it's angled slightly on that side. I think the tops are fairly level. Yeah. So I get that in, and then once I'm there, I can think, well, that's the edge of the cabin, that side. That's the edge there, and then there's a few side windows there. Working upwards, this red, I don't know what you call that, like a visor bit. It's fairly horizontal there, then it just slightly angled, I think, on the sides there. And then the same at the top, this slightly bowed shape. And then working down, looking at this space here, so I'd say nearly a window's depth, perhaps to about there. That could be that. I could see how wide that comes compared to something to the windows. I could measure that and then compare that to the windows. I think it's coming out to about here. I could do the same this side. The depth of it, it's about 1.5 times the cabin depth. So whatever I've got there, it's coming down to about here. That would be how I'd kind of progress that one. And the same with all this rigging, what you want to call this, anything up here, I can relate to where these windows are, see how things line up. So it's like once I've got something drawn in, I can then scan up and down and across. So that would be that one. This one, although it's a simpler boat, I think in some ways it's a little bit more challenging. In that we're looking at the end and the side, and we're looking at the top. There's quite a few different bits we're looking at there. So, I think a bit harder. What I suggest, if you're drawing something like this, is perhaps tackle this top bit first. And one strategy which I thought might work is to draw a rectangle, sort of almost like maybe from here to here. You've got a horizontal line there, and then one at the top. That. And then, so that kind of gives you, so the challenge here is like foreshortening, because this is disappearing into space, but it's all quite compressed really. So there's a temptation, I've seen some of my students want to draw something a bit like that, where this is all stretched out, because we know that it's quite a long bow. Yeah. But it's a way of trying to get that looking in proportion, looking in perspective. We could then think, well, that's that high, and that would fit in 1, 2, perhaps nearly 3 times that way. So if I came back over here and draw something that's about there. Yeah, that's about the right sort of proportion, about 1 to 3 that way. Another thing you can do that I think is quite useful is to look at the relationship between the front of the bow here and the middle of the back there. So if we've got a straight edge, and just rule a line through there. So I've basically done it on a bit of plastic because this photo, I don't think I've got any other copies of that, and somebody gave it me. But a lot of my photos, I don't really mind what we do to them. So once you've got that, what you can then notice is that actually that's the middle of the bow, but we're seeing an awful lot more this side than we are this side. So it kind of distorts that. The other thing is this side, you know, there's a very gentle arc or bow shape there. And then this side is a much tighter, wider curve. So it's like getting the characteristics of those shapes really. So again, if I go back to the yellow pencil, so I'm thinking that's this line here, I think it's something like that. Try and hold that and bring that across, something like that angle. And it's probably best to just do this quite lightly, really. Try and get, so from that point to here, try and get a nice, gentle curve there. And the other thing about this curve here is working out when the middle, where it starts, it comes back this way, then it starts to turn the other way. And I would say it's about there. So on my drawing, thinking about there is, it sort of gives me something to aim at. The other thing to do here would be to get the back in, wouldn't it? So that's about there. So is that about halfway across? Almost halfway across. So it's about there. And then sometimes when you're drawing curves, I find that these tighter radiuses, that might be a good place to start, because it's easy to get that shape and then broaden out. So I think that sort of shape, and that's coming down just below that point, about there. And then you can get the shape of the back of the bow, and yeah, we've got the middle. I think, well, that's actually angled a little bit that way. So you could then something like that shape. And the same with the front, it really drops off of there. And then these little bits of clinker fill, I think it's called, or shiplap, it's looking at the spaces really. So this first one, perhaps about there. The next one's a bit closer together, perhaps a bit closer together still. And then on this end, they're much, much closer. So having a few points just to aim at, again, I think it's easier than just trying to sort of randomly try and do something like that. So again, I think that's going down, then coming up. Go down even further. A bit more there, and then it kind of gets a bit lost in the shadows, what's going on in there. And then the seats, something like that. So that's all done quite lightly and sketchily. If I was then happy with that, I could then go over and make these more solid, firm lines. So that's how I would go about drawing something like that. That's the sort of strategy, the sort of things I'm trying to look for. Is things like, yeah, start off with that relationship between that and that. Obviously, if you're outside drawing, you can't really put boxes around things, but you can look for those sort of things. You can look for those sort of angles, try and sight the angle. You could measure from the top to there and compare it from there. You could do that kind of measuring, see how many times that goes.
Would you ever use like that viewfinder?
You could do, yeah, why not? Yeah, no, you could use that.
Because
Anything.
you could kind of just go like that.
Yeah. Well, you could, yeah. Well, you could, if you've got one, you could stick a bit of cardboard under it. I've got a little one that's adjustable. You can adjust the shape.
Yeah.
A little plastic one.
Did you make it?
No, I bought that.
Cheap, that's cheap.
I know, it's tempting to make everything. Yeah. I used to, yeah, but it's just things like a little window mount. It's, you know, a photographic window mount makes a good viewfinder, or just cut a hole in a bit of cardboard. So anything that can help really. Okay. Any questions? Okay, right, let's go.